enhancing your ERM program and information security. My name is David Paxton. I'm a certified community bank risk specialist and senior vice president of risk management solutions at Bankers Bank. And I'm excited to be your host again for one of our webinar sessions. This program is brought to you by Bankers Bank. We're the Midwest's leading provider of correspondent banking services to community banks. And it's an independent source of non-competing financial services. Bankers Bank serves a market of over 600 financial institutions and provides a strong portfolio of innovative solutions to help our community banks thrive and focus on the needs of your customers and communities. So today we're talking about enhancing your ERM program and information security. We got a couple of really good topics to talk to you about. First of all, a couple of housekeeping items to go over. Everyone on this meeting is muted. And if you have any questions for us, please submit those via chat. We'll get to those at the end of the session, but your questions are valued. And if we have time at the end of the presentation, we can get to some of those questions on chat. If we don't have time, we'll send those replies back to you as an email. And finally, this session is being recorded. As such, we'll provide a copy of this to you at the end of the webinar by email, as well as some other valuable information that you're going to get during the presentation today. Also, you'll be directed to a short survey at the end of the webinar. Whenever you get this link, please complete it, as we like having you share ideas that we can use to make future webinars and go over topics that are pertinent and valuable to you. To introduce our speakers today, again, I'm Dave Paxton with Risk Management Solutions at Bankers Bank. A little later in the presentation, we're going to be joined by Kyle Howard. He's the Senior Vice President of Technology and Analytics for Bankers Bank, and he's also our Chief Information Officer. And also joining Kyle is going to be Rob Zietlow. He's our Vice President of Technology and Analytics, who's been very invaluable to us for cybersecurity and monitoring throughout the bank. So we're really excited to have them join us today to talk about cybersecurity and some best practices. Our agenda, pretty brief today, but we've got two big topics to talk about. First, I'm going to go over creating risk indicators, kind of the building blocks of working on information that you're going to see to start your own risk program and monitoring risk at your bank. And then the bulk of our time is going to be with Kyle and Rob talking about vulnerability and testing and tracking for cybersecurity. So let's go ahead and kick off here and start talking about creating risk indicators. And I guess we should probably talk about the definition of that first, right? So what is an indicator? It's measurable data that reports risk. And you want that information because it's measurable. There's no subjective feelings to this. There's information that you absolutely need in order to see whether a risk is going up or going down. It's often referred to in the market as a KRI or a KPI. And we'll get into the definitions of those here in a second. It forms the bedrock of risk reporting. There's an enterprise risk score, there's risk category risk scores, there's attribute scores that group indicators together. But at the bedrock of it all are the KRIs and KPIs that make up your risk reporting. And so therefore, I consider those the bedrock, the base of risk reporting. And it's information you can rely on. And it should be easily accessible to you. You don't want to spend 3 weeks looking for one single number for your KRI or your KPI. It's hard to pull up. It should be information that you can easily access and also easily verify. So what's a KRI versus a KPI, and why should you have both? So, and then whenever we talk about having both, it's depending on what kind of risk that you want to monitor and what specific risk categories you want to talk about in regard to those. So a KRI stands for Key Risk Indicator. And so it's the exposure of risk for a specific item. So again, exposure of risk for a specific item. And it's the signal of how particular a risk event is becoming more likely or less likely to happen. So let's look at a couple of examples of that. Large depositor concentrations. A large increase in your depositor concentration shows that your customer base is becoming more risky because your customer base is less diversified. If you think about some banks that have a very particular niche involved with them, if you were tracking a key risk indicator that was your large depositor concentration, it's important to know whenever that concentration is growing, because if you have a significant economic event or supply chain disruption that affects these specific borrowers or these specific depositors in this case, then that could negatively affect your liquidity and your ability to fund your balance sheet at your bank, because your depositor base is not as diversified as you'd like it to be. So that's important to track. Classified loan concentration. So a higher concentration of classified loans means your loan portfolio is becoming a higher credit risk and needs to be better managed. Cybersecurity incidents. You're going to hear about that later on today, and that's kind of the crux of the second half of this presentation. And as Kyle and Rob will discuss in our next segment, a higher count of cybersecurity incidents point to a huge problem with your current program. This could lead to not only the classic example of an unavailable core system impacting your operations, but also think about it again from a point of view of your core systems are down. That could negatively impact your customer perception and therefore impacts your reputational risk. We're not even going to get into loss of personal information or data breach. We're just talking strictly about core system unavailability, like your core system is down after 3 p.m. and you've got a line of customers at your drive-through. So again, tracking a specific risk, cybersecurity incidents is important just to get an idea of an overall risk for your organization. So let's shift over to the other side. And again, enterprise risk management is not so much about loss control as it is monitoring the success and strategy at your bank. You want to know whether or not you're executing on your strategy well, because you want to be successful in your planning. So a KPI is monitoring the success or lack of success in some regards of your performance of your strategy at the bank. So again, it's how well the metric is performing compared to your desired financial goals or tolerances. And it also measures your strategy or managerial effectiveness. And so some examples of this would be net interest margin. It shows the value of your portfolio and how well you're executing on your pricing strategy. Loan to deposit ratio is an indicator of availability for growth. And so are you leveraging your deposit dollars and making that work? And then also core deposit growth. It's how well you're doing in regard to your market penetration. And are you growing your deposit base? So these are effective things to be measuring for performance at your bank to see how well you're doing in conjunction with where you want to be. So where do you start looking for indicators? So we've talked about KRIs and KPIs. Where do you start looking for those? And that's an important first step. And obviously the risk assessment is important. So risk assessments that you're doing are looking for ways that risk could impact your organization throughout your bank. But risk assessments only go so far. They tell you where the risk is going to be. It doesn't tell you whether they're going up or down. It's simply telling you where to look. So risk assessment is a good place to start looking for your indicators. Just don't use your risk assessments as your risk indicators themselves. A huge source of indicators and understanding risk at your organization is ask the risk owners. Your chief credit officer, your chief compliance officer, your chief financial officer, those folks are risk owners in your organization. They're the overall risk owners, and they understand risk in your specific areas better than anyone else. And so they should be the first person to be consulted as far as looking for indicators that measure risk within the organization. And also, obviously, if they're involved in that process from the very beginning, they're going to have buy-in in the process, and you're building a very strong risk culture at your organization. Strategic plans. If you have a strategic plan, you should consult it and say, where could strategy go off the rails? Where could strategy go wrong? How do we know if we're executing well on our strategy or not? Again, look for those key performance indicators that you have to track those as well. Your UBPR and call reports are important sources of information. That's public data, but you can use those to track trends up and down. Enterprise risk management isn't a crystal ball. It's not going to tell you what's going to happen in 6 months, but look in your indicators and look at trends and see what's changed from the beginning of your strategic plan until now. What's changed for you and some of your peers as well. Management and board meetings. I can't stress enough that having a discussion about risk in the management level is very important, because if you're having discussions through your ALCO, your credit committees, some of those committees, very laser focused on what's important to them as far as these specific committees. You should also be having meetings at least quarterly to talk about your indicators and what's changed. So if you think about if you were never having a conversation about operational risk with the financial people in the room, you can't have a holistic discussion about risk, because not everyone has a seat at the table. So it's a good way to have a good round discussion about enterprise risk at your bank. Your board also needs to be engaged. In an effective risk management culture, your board needs to be they have to be an assertive counter for risk to management in your bank. So it's important to have your board involved as well. And of course, audit and examination findings and reports are good places to look for that information as well, because it tells you what you should be focused on and what needs to be taken care of before your next exam comes up. So to wrap up talking about our risk indicators, let's kind of sum this up again. And it's important to start small. Don't have 100 risk indicators. Start with 20. Build it up over time. Were the risk indicators that you chose ones that were very valuable to you and were impactful in the reporting, or were the ones that you picked out, they don't tell us much, we should probably move on to something else? So again, start small where you know and that information was valuable and it led to some eye-opening moments, but also build it up over time. Know where you want to go with the data, because it's part of creating a big picture. Again, do we want to measure for the risk that you feel is top of mind for the bank and start there? Did the data take you to that place? Did it show you what you wanted to know with that? And again, think about all the peripheries with that. We're enterprise risk management, so we're not just thinking about our core system unavailability. We're talking about our core system being unavailable and our customers are backed up in the drive-through on a Friday afternoon, and they're very upset because they can't deposit checks or deposit cash or get money out of the ATM machine. So again, thinking about things like that. And then finally, again, make sure your indicators, which are forming the bedrock of your risk program, make sure that information is reliable. It's information you can trust and you can say, yes, I know exactly where this is going with that. And then finally, your risk indicators should reflect your bank. Don't take risk indicators that are important for your peer group all across the country. Find indicators that are specific to you. If you have a good ag focus, you're focused on 1 to 4 family lending, if you're really into manufacturing, lending, or et cetera, make sure your indicators are specific to your specific bank, because you're measuring your risk, not someone else's. You're doing your own. So to wrap up, I want to thank you all for talking about or joining us to talk about risk indicators. And I'm going to pass this over to Kyle and Rob to talk about cybersecurity.
Good morning, everyone. Just as a reminder of who I am, Kyle Howard. I'm the Chief Information Officer at the bank, and I'm joined with me by Rob, and I'll be handing it off to him throughout the presentation here. The first slide we wanted to start out with is why it's important to track cybersecurity. So when we're talking about the cybersecurity focus, why do we want to track that in a risk insights program or just in general? Tracking in any matter is critical to a cybersecurity program. I think everybody would agree with that. But even if you don't have risk insights and you decide not to get risk insights or an ERM product, many of the items in this presentation we designed to be applicable to your organization. So we're hoping by the end of these, we kind of do a deep dive and we come back out that you have a good overview of what you could take away to apply to your organization. And one other thing I want to emphasize, and it will be kind of reiterated throughout the presentation, is make sure that when you're thinking about the things that you're tracking and the programs you have, the tools in place, and even the resources or staff that you have handling your cybersecurity program, that you're not thinking in the manner of let's just check a box, but you're understanding and elevating those items to a point where you can make a decision. Understanding is really the key thing, and I do think that's where a program like Risk Insights can help, and it has helped our organization. And I'll get into that in the next couple slides. But the other thing that we always say in the cybersecurity world is, it's not if an event's going to happen, it's when, and that's going to be a key theme throughout this deck. You can control the policies, procedures, practices, the reporting you put in place to handle when a cybersecurity event is going to happen, but it will happen, right? It might be a small one that you find you have the controls in place for. It might be a broad, sweeping one like what David was talking about with the ATM, right? Let's say that was related to a cyber incident, and you want to make sure that what you're putting in place can handle and scale to those different instances that you might have. The other thing that I think is important about tracking and reporting is it provides visibility to the organization. And this really goes to that other point I made about understanding. You want to make sure that what you're doing and reporting, the leadership in your organization has a feel for, right? And understands what's being reported, can have a conversation around it, and drive some direction. The other thing that I wanted to touch on is it promotes the active management of cyber risk. And I think these last two bullets on the slide deck is really where a tool like Risk Insights shines. You get that visibility, you get that discussion going, and that active management of the cyber risk in your organization. It really makes things, it neutralizes it, makes it all digestible, and displays it alongside your other risk points, right, that you're tracking. So if it's liquidity, operational, whatever, cybersecurity could have a seat right next to that. And then those conversations are happening not only in your IT department, but they're also happening at your leadership levels, or if you're sharing your risk insights dashboard with your board, it would be happening at your board levels where, hey, why did this score go down or up? I think Risk Insights in particular has helped us because it gives a great history kind of tracking metric, right? So you can go back and see how your score has been doing and performing over time. And then it also impacts the overall organizational weight. And speaking of that, I'm going to dive into what Risk Insights or what you want to kind of consider when you're thinking about a program for Risk Insights. There's a couple different considerations that we wanted to cover, and it kind of depends on how your organization is set up. One of the things that even a discussion we had when we were first setting up the cybersecurity domain in Risk Insights was, do we want it to be, up front and center, weighted against the same as all of the other ones, or should it be, tucked under another domain? And I think there are pros and cons to each. Standalone really elevates its importance to the measurement, and it's a reflection that feeds all the way up into the reporting dashboard. And in full disclosure, that's how we have it set up. So I'm a little biased towards that. And one of the things you want to think about when you're setting this up, and if you decide to go with a standalone or putting in another domain, let's say you decide to put it in another domain, like operational risk is one, and that's one we were thinking of. Like, hey, let's have operational risk up front in our dashboard, and then we'll have cybersecurity as a measurement under that, right? One of the risks of that is that the weight of the measurement might be skewed by cybersecurity, and the importance of cybersecurity might not be elevated to the level it needs to be. But again, that really depends on what your organization's feel is for cybersecurity and your cybersecurity program, and how you want to handle it. And honestly, Risk Insights can do either. So moving on to the next bullet, what to measure. You can really measure any cybersecurity metric that's relevant to you. So going back to David's slide where he was talking about bits of data that you can gather and different resources you can get them from, we put some thought around, hey, how do we gather our metrics, and what are other metric points that you might see where you could kind of roll that up into a product like Risk Insights. And some of the ones we came up with, system vulnerability tracking, employee cybersecurity testing, feedback from auditors, regulators. I think that was a bullet on David's slide there. Incident tracking, help desk ticket metrics, and phone metrics. Now, those last two are interesting because they don't directly affect your cybersecurity, but you could argue that, hey, if my help desk metrics are high, right? If I'm going if we're overloaded on the help desk side, we aren't able to focus on cybersecurity. So that is something to think about when you're thinking about your metrics. You might want to track that and just keep an eye on how your help desk volume and your call volume is going in your IT area, because that might actually impact your cybersecurity program. One second here. All right, sorry about that. So then the next item is the phone or the KRI metrics, right? So KRI metrics, these things that I just talked about, they'll evolve over time. So what you might see today, even for us, right, and the bottom of the slide, the things that we're tracking, those will probably change even in the next quarter, right? And that's kind of the benefit about something like Risk Insights is these conversations are happening at a leadership level, and we're making decisions. Hey, are we tracking system vulnerability accurately? Are we tracking employee testing accurately? Is our appetite correct? Is our weight correct for that value, right? And honestly, before we had something like Risk Insights, those conversations happened, but they didn't happen at a visible leadership level, right? You would have those conversations in IT and make a decision. The benefit of something like Risk Insights is it kind of brings it all together. So what do we measure? Those items below. So system vulnerability tracking, employee testing training, external feedback, incident tracking, critical system availability. And we'll have slides that go through kind of each one of those. But what I want to say about these items is it's not just like one thing we're tracking. These consist of multiple data points being fed into them, right? So when we're talking about system vulnerability tracking, it might be patch management, it might be different incidents that happen, things like that, right? So it's kind of a roll together into these categories. And I wanted to share a picture of our dashboard. Now I've got it a little grayed out for some of the more sensitive data, but we do have cybersecurity as its own domain, right? It's its own category in our dashboard. The detail is on the right, and that's that detail, those bullets I just walked through. So every time, and we do our ERM, our risk insights review quarterly, right? And so every time we sit down quarterly with leadership, we're walking through each one of these. We're looking at the history and the trends that it puts together over time, and we can really see a nice roll up of these metrics, right? And so then we can have those discussions, make those decisions that impact the operational side of IT and make us a better organization. One of the other tips I'll give on risk insights in particular is that we found is be thorough in the insights area, right? It's an opportunity to give an explanation behind the metrics, good or bad. And this was something our other reporting didn't really have, right? So you would get a report without a whole lot of context, right? And just some data points. Risk insights gives us an opportunity to not only give that data and that history, but also some insights behind what happened to impact that data. And it answers some of those commonly reoccurring questions. So now that we've walked through kind of a high level of cybersecurity, why it's important, the Risk Insights product, I'm going to hand it off to Rob for the next couple of slides. And just a reminder, an intro of who Rob is. He's one of our key cybersecurity resources at the bank, and he's been with the bank in this role for 11 and a half years. All right, Rob, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Kyle. Yeah, I tend to talk a little fast, so we're going to try to slow it down. I was told to Mr. Rogers it, so if I speak too fast, please let me know. First and foremost, one of the things that we measure is system vulnerability. And when we were going through this slide deck, something I was really kind of wavering on was either having this slide first or the next slide that we have first. And we kind of decided on this slide, primarily just because it's kind of what's in the news. Verizon, the big multimedia conglomerate that has lots of different things, they have a department that goes through, and when there's a breach, so information gets shared that shouldn't, information gets leaked that shouldn't, or an incident, denial of service, actually a compromise, something like that, they have a department that comes in, cleans up, takes a look, makes sure everything is clean, takes a look, how did this happen, what can we do to prevent this in the future? And they started about 16, 17 years ago, and as time has grown, other entities that do that same thing have reported back. And every year around May, June, Verizon releases what they call the Verizon Breach Report. And it's kind of a wrap up, a look back at the previous year and seeing what's going on, what are trends, are there going to be potential future trends? Why do the bad actors and the malicious people attempting to hack, why they do what they do? And so for the 2024 report, which looks back at 2023, One of the things that they found was system vulnerabilities. So missing patches, having exploits in systems, it tripled. It grew by 180% from where it was at in 2022 to 2023. And this was really grown and kind of jumped off the back of some vulnerabilities that were making the news. At the end of December 2022, there was a vulnerability called Log4j, which is a logging library within the Java programming platform. It was allowing people to have remote code access, remote code execution, being able to do all these sorts of nasty things without much interaction. So that kind of perked a lot of people's ears up, people that knew what they were doing, or people that just heard about it in the news and say, hey, I thought I'd give this a try. And they started looking for this Log4j and they exploited it. Fast forward to the middle of 2023, at the end of May, beginning of June, most of us are probably now familiar with the MoveIt vulnerability. A ransomware group went and stole information. They exploited this vulnerability, and they were holding that information that they stole for ransom. And that also really drove a lot more keen interest, saying, hey, for the longest time, these bad actors have gone after people. They've gone after the phishing attempts. They've gone after credentials. They've tried to get people to click on this link that then downloads and loads ransomware on their system. Well, now again, they're kind of making that shift back to, let's see what's out there. Let's poke and prod, see if there's any vulnerabilities that can allow us these exploitations. So that's where the system vulnerabilities are really important, and patching those. This is something that we take very seriously. We are, I'm often looking at the dashboard. We have our security scans going on a daily basis. Certain things that we have going on looks like Kyle just dropped. Things that we have going on, on a weekly basis or a daily basis, depending on what the sensitivity is and what it is. So that gives us that insight into what's out there. The system vulnerabilities, the missing patches, these are the things that kind of quote unquote make good TV. If you're watching one of the CSIs, I'm sure, and all sorts of other TV shows, guy pops on the black hoodie and he's like, typing away and he's like, I'm in, indicating that they might have exploited a piece of software. That's still that's one of the ways that they do it, but it's not as glamorous, and it's not as, it didn't happen as often as, they made it out to believe. And now here in 2023 with those vulnerabilities, it happened a little bit more often. So that's one of the big things you need to do, and having your IT security staff, your IT staff make and patch these systems. And that's where, again, having a report so you know what's out there and what needs to be patched and where their time should be spent. Those are the sorts of things that you need to know. There's many different utilities out there that allow it to do this. To make a mention of a few, there is Rapid7 makes a product that's out there. I think CrowdStrike has a platform that's out there. Nessus by Tenable is out there. I think there's a company called Connect Secure. There's a large variety of ones out there, but they can be kind of costly. So CISA, the Center for Internet Security, one of the things that they do is in 2024, they started talking about Project Fortress and getting extra funds for that. Well, what that can do is you can go to CISA, sign yourself up, and it will scan your external infrastructure free of charge. That way it can start giving you an insight of what's out there, what needs to be patched from an outside looking in. It's a great start, and then from there you can kind of mature your internal scanning. When we report our scanning, and we put it all together and we have one big report, but when we look further at things and we do a little bit more deeper dive on our system vulnerabilities, we look at the DMZ instances, so computers that are facing the internet, providing services to the public. Those are in what's called the DMZ, a demilitarized zone. What that is that it's a buffer. It's its own separate area. So in the event that machine does get compromised one way or the other, they can't necessarily get into the internal network where the soft GUI center, for lack of a better term. So we look at our patch rates on our DMZ. We look and we track our rate of user workstations. that is just as big of a threat, if not more of a threat. Your end users are getting emails from unknown sources. Your end users, your user base is getting, is surfing the web that could potentially take over, and be hit with what's called a 0-day attack or some other vulnerability if your machine isn't patched. So that's where we divide out DMZ, user workstations, which are laptops and any workstation within the environment in the office. And then from there, we go and we track the internal infrastructure. The internal infrastructure, that's everything behind the firewall. It's on segregated networks, it's everything. So it has those extra protections in place that are still there, and they're not as risky behavior. We don't have people surfing the web from them. We don't have people using their email on them. They have very specific roles, and that's what they do all day long. So the risk is still there, but it's minimized because the risky behaviors are not being taken place on those machines. That's a whole lot of information. So what you and your organization wants to track really is up to you. As we've developed this product and looked at this product, it's been 3-4 years now. It's changed dramatically from where the initial stages were, and based on feedback that we've received. As Kyle kind of mentioned, this document evolves, and as you start out, it's going to change. It's going to change a lot, and that's a good thing. And it might be changes that, we got this extra bit of information. It's not useful to us, but at least and you can maybe learn a little bit more about the system and how things work, because it might be those little nooks and crannies and details that you don't use a whole lot, so you're kind of not really aware they exist. What else do you want to track? What sort of vulnerabilities do you want to track? You obviously want to track your criticals, your highs. You want to track, the systems that are on, that have the end users, that have the DMZ, track that. But at what point, it's that risk and reward. Everything with security is the convenience versus security. And, at what point, because, vulnerabilities are coming out all the time. At what point do you say, okay, these need to be dealt with immediately? These can wait a little bit. They're mediums, there are lows. They require very specific situations. They require, extra user interaction. So this is something that we've looked at tracking, because you're just going to drive your IT staff is going to drive themselves nuts trying to do these. So in 2017 or 2019, I apologize, I don't know the exact date, Carnegie Mellon produced a report that kind of looked at bang for the buck is the term they would use, at what CVSS score. So CVSS score is a scoring system that the security community has come up with to evaluate and give a number rating to just how bad a vulnerability is. So, obviously CVSS 10 is really bad. 1, it's informational for the most part. They looked, and it's kind of like the Richter scale, where it's 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and so on. Anything over a 7.0 and higher, those are the ones that you want to tackle and look at first. So that's some of what we report on. From there, it's extra added benefits to get those secured and patched up. Something else we all do at Bankers Bank is we not only track, and when we report up to the board, our governance committee, our ERM committee that Kyle and Dave sit on, and then we report this up to the board audit risk. We track a 30-day and a 90-day. The 30-day is going to give you kind of that snapshot in time. How good are we doing right now? Honestly, sometimes it may not necessarily look as good, but there's reasons for that, and that's exactly what we end up explaining when we go to these different boards and different committees. There was an example in 2023 at the end of December. There was 2 vulnerabilities in some software called curl, and what curl does is it goes and it fetches something from the internet and brings it back and downloads it to your system. You very minimal interaction. You say curl, go get this. It does it. There it is. It's an open source application, but Microsoft has built it into the operating system for newer Windows 10 and Windows 11. The vulnerability was there. It was seen by the scanning software. It said, hey, you have this vulnerability on there on your system. You need to take care of that. But when you start to look and investigate, Microsoft was like, whoa, 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 don't patch this manually. We're going to patch this. We're going to release a patch. Don't worry about that. So we're kind of waiting on Microsoft. Well, Microsoft, because of the holidays and everything like that, it went over that 30-day window. So it made that window, that reporting for that 30-day window look a lot worse than it would normally be. Again, we weren't at major risk because it's very, it would take very, a malicious actor would have to compromise the system. A malicious actor would then have to go and host a malicious package, a malicious piece of software. They would then need to take that compromised host and grab that, and then that would have to pass through our other defense in depth strategies that look at what's being downloaded, look at all those things. So the risk was there, yes, but the risk was minimized by compensating controls, but it was still there nonetheless. We explained that to all of our committees. They all understood. We had the Microsoft documentation to back it up. But then that's where the 90-day comes into play. Say, okay, we had one kind of bad month for XYZ. Over this entire quarter, things look pretty solid. Our patching rate has been very high. So it kind of gives, you have that snapshot in time and you have a slightly longer view. Again, these were all ideas that came out of as we developed what to report to the ERM and the dashboard in the previous slide. As we worked with our TA governance, our board audit risk, our ERM, and one of the nice things I liked about that is I'm IT. I've always been IT for my entire career. So I do, in a lot of ways, I look at things from an IT lens. And the folks in the TA governance, the board audit risk, ERM, kind of challenged me and made me think a little bit outside the box because they're looking at things with a different sort of view. So having that external feedback, which is going to get touched on later on, also really beneficial to that system vulnerability. And something it's made for me, being an IT guy, forcing me to better be able to translate from IT jargon to to information that people who aren't in the weeds of IT every single day, being able to translate for that. So if you're outsourcing that, completely common, completely normal. When I got started in community banking briefly back in the early 2001, from there, there was many people in many organizations that we dealt with where the IT guy was also the head of marketing and it was one of their tellers and doing all these things, wearing many different hats. And I'm learning that, it's not all that different still. So having an external entity be able to provide that for you would be outstanding and can help them and pay dividends and give you that extra information that you need. So are you getting these patch rates from your vendor? If you're not, you definitely should. Definitely talk to them and let them know, hey, these are things that we'd like to see. And again, you're going to work with them. You're going to work with whomever is providing this information for you, and get it to where you want it. As Kyle said, there's no one size fits all. Every institution is going to have their own way of doing things. It may match what another institution has, but there's always that possibility that things are going to be different. Moving on to the next slide. Employee testing and training. As I started off with the last slide, this was kind of where I was, teetering between having this one first and system vulnerability second, or vice versa. With the employee training and testing, people are our greatest asset, but also our weakest link. People make mistakes. We can try to, we have systems in place that can catch spam, catch malicious emails, things like that, but things can happen where they'll slip through. So having those people there to do what they need to do and be able to identify these sorts of things, that's where that training comes into place. When I have new employee orientation, I always kind of talk about is patching the human firewall. And my role in security and system administrator, I patch software. I'm adding new information, updated information to those systems so it can work better, make better computing decisions, so on and so forth. So as we train and as we test, we kind of think about patching as the human firewall. As I mentioned, I'm IT. I've always been IT. I don't know how the mortgage department really works and how they determine everything. I don't know how our investments team, our commercial banking, but those individuals who have been in those positions, they know, they have that gut feeling. They know whether something passes that sniff test or not. That's where we rely on them. And so one of the good ways to do that is when those potentially malicious, or phishing emails or anything like that come in, make it so it's as easy to report as possible. I know in working with some of the new employees, as I sit down with them, there's many different products out there that make it so a user can click a button that takes that email and sends it off, so it's no longer there. You know, that makes it easier on them. We want them to focus and use their training on those emails. We want them to look for, I don't know who the sender is. There's that sense of urgency. This URL, they want me to click on this URL and I have to take some form of action. Otherwise, something bad's going to happen to me. Something bad's going to happen to them. Something like that. So we want people to use that information. But, in the event that they can't quite figure it out, or there's a lot of it, we want to know, because it could be that proverbial canary in a coal mine. Let us know that something bigger is going on, as we've seen when the vendor had their email compromised a while back. Everybody, almost literally everybody within the bank got that phishing email. So we want to know about that canary in a coal mine. But that's where we want people to be trained, and we want people to be able to make those educated decisions. We don't want them just to be like, oh, I have the button, that's IT's fault. If you're just training them and teaching them to do that, you're kind of wasting your dollars when it comes to that. We want to make suggestions. We want them to make decisions. We want them to make good decisions. Hopefully they do, but making it as easy as possible for them to do those sorts of things is, it's very beneficial. I've talked to our executive leadership. At no point in my entire 11.5-year career and their career at the bank have we ever lost a deal because somebody took those extra 10, 15, 20 seconds to look through and walk through the steps of identifying a phishing email. And it could be legit, it could be malicious, but we've never lost a deal because somebody took that extra time. And speaking with some of our customers, we know that they appreciate people taking that extra time to do that. But the phishing training and the phishing test, this is definitely something that's very important. The Verizon breach report for 2022, having that phishing, that was one of the #1 ways at that point in time that people got in. They were trying to phish, trying to get those credentials. As more people have MFA within their organizations, as more phishing education comes out, this is where they're trying to find other ways to get in because people are getting smarter. But that doesn't, the downside of people getting smarter is we're also putting more on them, so they're moving faster, trying to do things they may not walk through those steps. But that's still what we want to do. One of the examples I use with that everybody is always kind of joking with me is, I'll go, oh, I thought this was your phish test. I thought this was your phish test, and like, no, it's not. I went and I looked at the numbers, and for the month of December, we at Bankers Bank had over 310,000 emails come into our infrastructure. So 310 emails, it's over 31 days. That's 10K a day. 190,000 of that 310 were stopped before it ever got to our employees. So using some of the technology that we have in place, it stopped it before we could actually get that email. So that kind of leaves us with 118,000 emails that came into our infrastructure. That's a lot. Across our infrastructure, some are systems, some are generated and go to other systems to handle certain messaging, but that's still a lot of the emails throughout the day and throughout the month that our employees see. 150 approximately, I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, 150, 160, somewhere in that ballpark, were my phishing emails. So dramatically less. So the odds of it being something potentially legitimately malicious and spam, something of that nature, is very high compared to my testing. And one of the things that we do is, we've taken industry recommendations. We don't necessarily have negative feedback when a user clicks and does things. We still use that as an education, the additional employee training. That's where we take it so they can learn and they can, be better in the future. All that stuff is tracked and reported up to our various entities. It's just that extra added training. This is what you should be looking for. There's a bunch of different technologies out there. I know InfoSec, that was based here in Madison, recently purchased. They do these sorts of phishing tests and training. Proofpoint, Barracuda, KnowBe4 are a bunch of others that I've heard when I talk to new employees and go through our new employee orientation. So there's lots of good products out there that can offer a lot of good security training, security awareness training, just to keep your staff, in the know. We're always letting people know if something new comes out. We're letting them know as well, just through ad hoc emails to the entire organization. Be aware of this. But like I said, those other institutions, InfoSec, KnowBe4, Proofpoint, Barracuda, offer great training at different price points. And the other nice thing is it offers they all offer a really nice dashboard. So when your auditors come into play and come into your organization, they can ask, hey, what do you do for training? You can have it right there for them, and they can focus their energy on something else. And I think with that, we will take it and send it back to Mr. Kyle.
All right, so our next metric, thanks, Rob, that was great. Our next metric here is external feedback. And this rolls back up into one of the points David made, is that there's a lot of feedback coming in from different areas, right? Auditors, third parties. There's different tools you can use. You might be performing different kinds of audits depending on what you have in-house there. And so we have a metric, and we thought the same thing when we were setting this up. We have a metric in our cybersecurity domain and risk insights that is called external feedback. And what I really like about having that metric is it sits right alongside the other ones that Rob just mentioned, system involvement and employee training, which are really kind of the operational ones. And it gives you that full picture of your cybersecurity program. So, if an auditor's, if everything looks great on the employee training side and the vulnerability side, but you have an audit recommendation, you can still track and tackle that in this full picture here, right? So it will impact your score, and then you can address that the same way you would address the other items. It kind of goes back to one of the things I said on the first, or I think it was the second slide, about making the information that comes into risk insights digestible, right? It's all in one spot. You can pick it up. You can understand what's happening. And so external feedback, we have this as one of our metrics because we think it helps give the full picture of what's going on. It could be things, we have a couple, we have a few bullets here underneath the what area. It could be 100 things, if we sat down and thought through it, I'm sure. But some of the more salient ones for us was the cybersecurity assessment tool, rest in peace. That one, I think it's getting retired August 31st. They sent their sunset letter out last year. Just touching on that CAT tool for a second, because I know a lot of institutions are likely using that tool, right? In their sunset letter, they recommended two tools in there, or they mentioned them, right? They had the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, which Rob mentioned earlier. They're putting together a cross-financial sector cybersecurity performance goal tracking tool that you can use. That's not out yet. I just checked, when I was putting this presentation together a couple days ago. They still have that it's coming the winter of 2025, so I'd imagine it's going to be out fairly soon here. But the other tool is out, and it's called the CRI Cyber Profile. What we really like about that tool is that it's tied to the NIST, similar to what the CAT tool was, right? And it's going to be updated alongside the NIST. That tool is also free. They have an Excel sheet you can download. You could start using it today. And there's hundreds of vendors out there that are implementing that tool within their system, right? Similar to what they did with the CAT tool, so you can port over to it. That's the other cool thing about the CRI profile, and in my opinion, is that you can port your CAT information from your most recent CAT. So let's say you did one in 24, you can actually port that over to the CRI Cyber Profile. And David's going to provide some resource links for you so you can get more information on that. But that's a great one to feed right into the score, and you can start on that tomorrow for free. The other two items below, they kind of go together, SOC audit and pen testing. It depends on what your organization does and what their size is. But even if you're not doing a SOC audit or penetration testing on your organization, I could almost guarantee that some of your vendors are. And so if you don't have that internally, you could look to some of your vendors to get reporting on that. And in my experience, the reporting kind of varies. They might give you some pretty detailed information that you could use for risk insights. They might give you an attestation. So it would be an area I would recommend exploring and looking to see if you could put into like an external feedback metric to give a fuller picture. Another item, and Rob mentioned this briefly, that again, it's free and out there, is CISA scanning. So the same institution that's doing the financial sector cybersecurity performance goals tool, they also offer today free vulnerability scanning service. They call it Internet as a Scanning, or Internet Scanning as a Service, sorry. And it continuously assesses the health of your internet accessible assets against known vulnerabilities. So let's say you have an online banking service and you want to kind of get set up today, you can plug into that for free today and get your metrics on vulnerability scanning. It at least gives you a good starting point, right? The last item down below is the RSAT V2 ransomware self-assessment. This was developed by the Bankers Electronic Crimes Task Force, state bank regulators, and the Secret Service. And it's a good questionnaire for financial institutions to assess their efforts to mitigate risk against ransomware. So this one's specifically focused on ransomware. And it gives you some good metrics you could put into something like this. It also gets the conversation going around, hey, do I have a ransomware playbook, and what am I doing about my ransomware risk? So it's a good tool, free tool, and one of the ones that we use today. The last I want to call it is cyber insurance feedback. So if they're giving you feedback while you're talking to your cyber insurance provider, that's something you could roll into this metric in Risk Insights, or even if you don't use Risk Insights, gather that feedback. So the next metric and the last one is incident tracking. Why is this important? It generates visibility around and conversations around the incidents that have happened and the controls in place. And this one I kind of call the catch-all, right? So we have all of our controls and all of our metrics, that the ones we talk through, all the roll-ups of all the different reports. If an incident does get through, or when it does get through, right? Because it's not if, it's when. This gives you that catch to track that as well. My tip for that would be the appetite for this should be relatively low, and it should be something you're constantly striving to get lower, right? So like if you start out and you're like, hey, we're getting 3 a year on average, let's start out with an appetite of 2 and kind of strive to go down there. One of the things about reporting this is that that conversation is constantly front and center and happening, right? So that's nice, and that's one of the things we use Risk Insights for. Is if we have any incidents, we want to track them through there and have those conversations. Another thing about incidents that I wanted to talk through was a couple different resources out there that you can use to help put controls in and prepare for an incident. FS Isaac, which I'm sure we've all heard of, they host a few tabletops exercises. I would highly encourage you to participate in those. We participate in those at least annually, and get some really good takeaways every time. It gets our business continuity plan in front of us. We go through it against the tabletop and make sure that it's still up to date and relevant. The Global Resilience Foundation, GRF, they also host a tabletop annually, and that's another one we've participated in, and I would encourage folks to look into. Speaking of the business continuity plan, one of the things that you want to make sure you're doing tabletops for and kind of staying on top of is making sure your business continuity plan is up to date and relevant, right? It's one thing to have it to check a box, but it's another thing to have it where you're actually going to be able to use it in a disaster, right? And so that's something that when we're doing tabletops and talking about incident tracking or incidents in general, that we're always trying to stay on top of is, hey, is this relevant? Is this information useful? Is this something that I would have on my side during a cybersecurity incident? One other thing related to the business continuity plan that I wanted to throw out there is you might want to look into putting together a ransomware playbook, which is basically a plan specific to ransomware, right? So if something happened with ransomware on your institution's devices, you would have that by your side. You'd be able to execute on it. And when you're thinking about these materials that you're putting together, you also want to think about where you're storing them. So for instance, if you had a ransomware playbook and you stored it on your on your network, and ransomware hit your network, playbook's useless, right? So you want to make sure that you have it in multiple areas, that you print it out, that you have copies of it, and that everybody kind of has it top of mind for when an event happens. With that, I'm going to move to our last slide here, which is an architecture diagram. I'll let Rob talk through that. Rob, we've got about 5 minutes here, so just cognizant of time.
I am aware. Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate it. Yeah, so what we have demonstrated here, the kind of Parthenon, I suppose, for a cybersecurity program is we have our baseline, things that we feel are the very core of what needs to be in place. We have our employee training, again, making our, having more training and making individuals more aware of what's going on is never a bad thing, especially when it comes to putting things at risk. So having that training is always a very good thing to have, and having a platform that allows you to track that, it's going to pay dividends. Your governance, your risk, and your compliance. Having that external feedback from external entities, be it an external service that looks at what's out there in your systems, takes a look and sees if there's vulnerabilities, things like that. That CISA program, there's products out there called Security Scorecard, BitSight. Black Knight. There's a number of them that kind of look at what your presence is on the internet. That can be positive as well and give you some more information and insight. And then your technical controls, your system vulnerabilities, your scanning, your GPOs that harden, your system hardening through other applications that you have out there, the things that auditors and all that might ask for. I just sat through an audit call yesterday, and it's kind of ho hum and asking, do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have this? But they're there for a reason and they ask for a reason. So it's always very important to have. So these are the three important things to have in your as far as your cybersecurity program. The great way to get it off the ground. From there you can add these extra pillars as we see in this diagram. We can add that extra thing. So having a dedicated security resource. Somebody like myself, we're lucky enough that we can have that. I'm lucky enough to have a job being able to do that. I appreciate it. So having that there, again, as I mentioned, it could be somebody wearing 10 different hats. Advanced technical control. So having that extra stuff, having extra applications that can help secure you and work around possibly some of the things in your infrastructure that would need to open up security holes. There's typically programs out there that will help you work around that and still add security and allow your people to do what they need to do. Third-party auditing, as I just mentioned, it's out there, it's necessary. We go through it a lot. It's there, and typically it's there because somebody else screwed up, and now we have to answer the questions because of something that they did. They made the news, they did something. We now have to sit through and answer those questions for those auditors. An organizational training tool, as I kind of mentioned with the InfoSec, the Proofpoint, Barracuda, KnowBe4, having something that helps you train your individuals. It's probably comes no surprise. I'm not a teacher. These places have people on staff that can make it so people will remember it, make it sticky, keep it in their mind and their forefront, present it in a way that it's useful to employees. And then finally, an organizational reporting tool. Obviously, we here are talking about the ERM and risk insights, but there's other tools out there, and just having something that you can see everything in one fancy place, present up to your board, and at least get a better overview of what is going on in infrastructure is always going to help. So with about a minute and a half left, I'm going to kick it back to Dave, and I thank everybody.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks, Kyle, for taking a deep dive into cybersecurity with us today. We really felt it was important to have our cyber team on our first presentation of the year. We definitely appreciate your time. Since we only have 1 minute left, we did get some good questions, and we tried to respond to those in the chat. But for some of the others, we'll send out the replies to some questions with our follow-up email. If you're not sure where to start, we'll provide you with the diagram Rob just presented as part of our PDF version of the slide deck. We'll also include some valuable links for you as well, including the CISA KV link, the CISA vulnerability scanning link, and the Verizon breach report, as well as the RSAT v2 link as well. So you'll have some resources coming at you with that. That being said, I want to thank everyone again for attending today. Look for our Q2 presentation, and if you have any topics you want us to cover and go over, send them in, and we'll be more than happy to talk about them. But thank you all, and have a great day.